Okay, good evening, everyone. This is the Wolfeboro Planning Board meeting of July 7th, 2020. My name is Kathy Barnard, and due to the COVID-19 crisis and in accordance with Governor Sununu's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this board is authorized to meet electronically. However, the Planning Board has jointly decided to proceed with a hybrid meeting format, allowing for members of the public and board to attend and participate in the meeting in person or virtually. In accordance with RSA 91-A:2, the board has one member joining the meeting remotely, which a public body has the authorization to allow. At this time, I'd like to take a roll call vote of all members present. For those participating virtually, please indicate why your attendance is not reasonably practical, just very briefly. And if you have any other individuals present in the room with you. So I'll go ahead with the roll call. Mike Hodder.
Present.
Brad Harriman.
Present.
Julie Jacobs.
Present.
Von Dugan.
Here.
Peter Goodwin.
Here.
Okay, and anyone in the room with you and want to give us a brief explanation of why you're not in attendance?
There is no one here, and I am concerned about the coronavirus.
Oh, okay, thank you. Susan Replier is not present, and John Thurston is not present, and Kathy Barnard, I am present. Okay, votes taken during this meeting will be via roll call vote for all members. In accordance with emergency order number 12 for members of the public, this is to confirm that we are the following. Number one, providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possibilities by video or other electronic means through GoToMeeting. All members of the public and board have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through the GoToMeeting platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in this meeting through dialing the following phone number, 1-646-749-3122, followed by the audio access code 918-242-429, or by video following the directions on the Town of Wolfeboro website posted on the home page under the virtual town meeting login information page. 2, providing public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting. We previously gave notice to the public of how to access the meeting in person or using GoToMeeting, and instructions are provided on the Town of Wolfeboro website at wolfeboronh.us on the virtual town meeting login information page. 3, providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with access. If anybody has a problem accessing the meeting via phone or computer, please immediately call 603-391-8489 or email the planning director at wolfeboronh.us. In the event that the public is unable to access the meeting, we will adjourn the meeting and have it rescheduled at that time. Okay, going to the agenda, the first scheduled appointment is a continued application for Huggins Hospital, and I'm going to step down from this because I'm a trustee of the hospital. Turn this over to Vice Chairman Mike Hodder. Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening, everybody. Before we get started, I'd like to appoint Julie Jacobs to sit in place of Susan Replier, who is not here tonight. Julie, can you tell us that you have reviewed all the materials and you're up to date with the current situation?
Yes, I did receive all the materials and I have reviewed them.
I'm having a hard time hearing through the mask. Could you speak closer to the microphone?
I did have a chance to read all the materials after I received them.
Okay, thank you very much. Then I'm going to reopen the public hearing on case number 2020-14, Huggins Hospital, which began on May 5 and has been continued to today. The application was at that time voted unanimously as complete. We shall continue with the presentations. Before I begin, I should acknowledge that the board has received communications from two individuals, Wentworth Watershed Association and a private individual and a butter to the hospital complex. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to the applicant's agent to make a further presentation of his principal's case. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much.
Could you identify yourself and for the cameras and for the public?
I will. For the record, I'm Jim Rines from White Mountain Survey and Engineering, and I'm here representing Huggins Hospital in their site plan review application for primary care renovations. With me tonight is Don Pushore, the Vice President of Facilities and Support Services, and Michael Shawalter, who's an attorney from Rath, Young, and Pignatelli. Don would like to start simply by reviewing what the need of the project was and why this is being proposed, because we felt like the May 5th meeting, that kind of got pushed aside as other topics got going. So after Dawn does that, then I would like to just review what changes have occurred since the May 5th meeting to the application, touch on some technical aspects, and then
will Mr. Schoenwalter addressing that? Will Mr. Schoenwalter be addressing the change in the application, the withdrawal of the salt shed, or will you be taking that?
I will be speaking to that.
Very good.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn it over to Dawn now.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
I am Don Pusher, the Vice President of Facility and Support Services at Huggins Hospital. I thank the board for seeing us in person. Some sense of normalcy has come back a little bit, that we can talk in person again.
Nice.
The reason, and I'm going to talk a little more anecdotally about why we have done this, and it is factual based, but 10 years ago, or probably 11 years ago, when they designed the new hospital, one of the things that they made an error on and did not do was they disregarded how they would take care of people that were utilizing our medical arts building. And for the public's information, our medical arts building is what houses our primary and specialty cares. Specialty surgeons, and that's where people go to access their outpatient needs. The problem is that when they did this, when they built the building, they took what was a drive that you could actually drive up and drive around, and they eliminated it. What they did is they actually deadheaded it against the back connector corridor that connects the new hospital, as we refer to it as, and the medical arts building. By doing that, what it did is it forced people, or forces people now, to actually end up backing up or driving up into what is essentially an alley and dropping people off. It's very dangerous. The amount of maintenance that requires during the snow months and during the winter is very, very bad. We are out there probably every 30 minutes to an hour, depending on the intensity of the storm, clearing that and applying whatever's necessary to keep that safe. And the issue is that ramp, which it's a ramp, over a 50-foot distance, actually has an elevation change of 4 feet. Now, when you are impaired, or you're trying to use a walker, or you're trying to push a wheelchair up, it's very difficult to do that. That type of ramp is something that should not have taken place when they built it, but the fact was they did. The reason for doing the parking and taking the opportunity to take down the buildings, or the portions of the buildings that we did, is it provided us an opportunity on the other side of the building, which had more reasonable access to the outpatient area or medical arts building, that is on a level that, with the addition of the 42 parking spots, provides us with 110 parking spots instead of the 35 that are immediate to the current medical arts entrance. I think anybody that's had the opportunity to use our medical arts building has probably been very frustrated by the fact that they literally will have to circle the parking lot for 15 minutes to find an appropriate parking spot that should be much closer. This provides us an opportunity with those 42 additional spots, or I'm sorry, 48 additional spots in the 52 that already exist, to provide an area where we can actually, and with the porte cochere, would allow the ability for people to drive up, discharge under a covered area, and then come back and pick their loved ones up, and do that in a much more appropriate way than we can currently provide. And that's the reason that we want to do this. We want to make our outpatient experience a much better one, and one that certainly the greater community deserves, and right a wrong that took place when they built the hospital back in 2009 and 2010. Are there any questions with regards to that?
I'll just interrupt, if I may, and make a note for the public and for the members attending that Mr. Thurston, member of the Planning Board, has joined us. Thank you. Continue.
If there are no questions, then I'll turn this over to Jim and put this in his trusty hands to be able to explain technically what's going on for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Busher. Jim?
Okay, thank you. Since the May 5th meeting, several things have gone on. The first is that we have eliminated the salt storage component of the proposal. The hospital has been working through the Public Works Department and through the Board of Selectmen to purchase salt from the town, so there will be no need to store on site. Secondly, we had a meeting with Dave Ford and Matt and Don Pushore and I, and we walked the drainage system that at the May 5th meeting, one of the abutters or one of the public mentioned that Dave Ford had commented that the drainage system looked like somebody had gone home at lunch and never came back. And Dave clarified with a document to the board that said that that was related to the town's drainage system, which discharges below Huggins onto Huggins property, but below the drainage for the system, and that comment was directed to that town drainage system and not the hospital's, which he said was working appropriately. The other thing is the hospital commissioned a company to do a camera inspection of the existing drainage system to determine its effectiveness. And what they found, they cameraed it and they cleaned it. And the 3 underground detention basins, after 10 to 12 years of use, had less than a half a cubic yard of sediment in 2 of them and less than a quarter of a cubic yard in 1 of them. And they had less than 1/10 of an inch of floatables or oils in them. So that, and they identified that they were in very good condition, or in good condition, I think was the adjective they used. And I think that this demonstrates that after 10 to 12 years that these treatment areas are working as designed. The capacity of the detention is still functioning as it was designed and been doing their job. The Hospital has also agreed to send their ground supervisor to the SnowPro program for certification so that they can ensure compliance with the Green SnowPro program. And they will disseminate that and make sure that everyone under them, it will be a global certification. Their snow storage has been, as was shown in the 2008 site plan approval, it is in all of the islands and surrounding the parking areas that go into the existing drainage system, and that will continue. The hospital has also agreed to put in they've engaged us to do an operation and maintenance manual for the existing drainage system that isn't part of this application to continue making certain that it maintains the functionality that it has over the last 10 or 12 years. I also submitted a document that demonstrated that because there was some question about whether we complied with the stormwater management regulations, and this is a redevelopment under the stormwater management regulations, Article Roman 10.2, where we felt that we had employed other LID techniques to the maximum extent practicable. Those are terms in the regulations, where we have provided treatment for at least 50% of the redevelopment that we are proposing. And that treatment is in the form of disconnecting certain impervious areas. We've proposed 4 infiltration basins and 1 filtration basin that handle the first flush or the first 1-inch storm. And in doing that, we have disconnected 7,344 square feet of impervious area while only adding 4,067. So we have a net reduction of 3,277 square feet. So while the test that we're obligated to adhere to is a 50% treatment, we are treating 180% of what we're proposing. So we felt that we have clearly complied with that. Matt also had asked if I could just provide the board a percentage of impervious of the entire site. And the entire site is at 48.7% in the existing condition, and 70% is what is allowed in the ROI district, which is where the hospital lies. And in the proposal, we will increase that by 0.5%, so it will go from 48.7 to 49.2%, still well below the 70% allowed. And the last thing I will, and I submitted this as something that I felt was important for the board and the public to understand, is when you drive by Huggins, it looks like it's nothing but pavement, but in the Crescent Lake watershed, which is 850 acres, it's only 2.2% of that watershed. And of the Lake Wentworth and Crescent Lake watershed, which all flow through Crescent Lake, it's less than 0.1%. It's 0.08%. So certainly, while Huggins needs to be responsible for what they've done, and we believe that they have been, it's equally responsible for everyone else who contributes to this watershed to just make sure that they're maintaining, and it shouldn't be placed all on the shoulders of one particular project. I believe that with that, I have concluded what I think is an update of what's occurred since we were last there. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the board or the public may have.
You have another individual who wishes to speak to this application? Mr.
Yes. Michael Showalter is here.
Michael
and I don't know
Schoenwald,
if
why
he
don't we
has-
have him up, and then after the presentation has been made by the three individuals, then the board can ask questions, and then I'll bring the public in.
Very good, thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and for the record, my name is Mike Showalter. I'm with Rathjong Pignatelli, and I'm here on behalf of Huggins Hospital. I believe you all saw the letter that we sent to the planning board last week, where we reviewed the legal requirements of the site review. And in that review, we found that they've passed everything that is required, both in the by the town ordinances and in the state and federal regulations. I did note in that letter in the very end that the hospital is doing more than just meeting the minimum requirements, and that they're actually doing much of what Jim has mentioned here to exceed those requirements and to exceed them in many ways. And I think that is something to take into account here, especially as the purpose of the site of the stormwater regulations, in large part, with respect to the water outflow is to ensure that that they're meeting these minimum requirements, but also it states there that they're supposed to that they can do more. And I think Huggins Hospital here is doing more. I don't have anything I need to add, I think, from that letter, but if there's any particular questions that you have with respect to the legal background, I'd be happy to address those areas. There is one thing I do want to mention. In Mr. Sullivan's revised review, he mentioned proposed condition number 10, which was that the Huggins Hospital should provide a certification document that all snow removal operators shall be Green Snow Pro certified. I would suggest that you follow what is provided for in the regulations, specifically in the DES regulations, WG 2200. They contemplate a master certificate, and this is backed up in the RSAs as well. And that master certificate, one person, a supervisor, can go ahead and get that certification, and then they're responsible as a supervisor for the facility, for all the employees there, to make sure that the employees follow what that supervisor has been certified to do in the program. And I think that is much more reasonable, especially considering the time constraints and the labor constraints that the hospital has.
I would have no problem with that. Matt, have you heard that? What do you have a problem?
I did recognize the discrepancy between the letter and the condition I'd suggested, and I think in accordance with statute, it's appropriate to identify simply that the snow removal supervisor is trained only or certified only.
Okay,
I think that's fine.
could you recraft number?
Yep, I've already done that, actually.
Okay, good. Then we'll get to that at the end if we get that far.
Okay.
Mr. Showalter, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Members of the board, do you have questions for Mr. Showalter, Mr. Pusher, or Mr. Rhines? I'll throw it open to the board members. Those of you who do, speak up.
Peter Goodwin here, and one of the things which I think I understand is that previous to this realignment of parking, the number of parking spaces was not sufficient to be associated with what the planning board has required, and now it does seem to be that way. And am I thinking about that correctly?
Screens are dead.
Yeah, Jim Rhines here. And yes, the parking, as a result of this, will also become fully compliant. It will be actually 2% more than is required.
Thank you.
I have a question for Jim regarding the snow storage in particular. The letter from Mr. Showalter's office suggests that Huggins is going to come up with a site-wide snow storage plan. You mentioned that in your testimony, and that is condition 12 of the application here if it goes as far as an approval stage. Can you speak to snow storage a little bit more in detail than you did in your opening presentation? Where exactly is snow storage going to be stored, and how will the melt be dealt with in the various catchment basins?
Sure. Matt, I don't know if you can put the plan up, or...
I'm having a bit of technical difficulty right now, so bear with me while I try to fix this.
Okay.
And I'll put it
Well,
up after that.
I'll begin with words and technical...
Board members have all seen the plan, so
Yeah.
we are all familiar with it.
So the intent, both with the 2008 approval as well as presently, is the snow is removed from critical areas. In fact, though it wasn't submitted, Dawn gave it to me tonight. He has a snow removal hierarchy, if you will, that is, certain areas, obviously the entrances are the first place that is cleared during a snowstorm, and then they have lower grades, but they're pushed away, and they have the locations identified where the snow is plowed, but it is plowed onto the existing islands within the development, which all drain to the existing drainage system that was designed back in 2008, goes through the treatment system, and ultimately discharges on the grass swale that is the last point of protection. They also go to the perimeters of the parking areas, which again drain down into those and exit on the grass treatment swale, ultimately leaving the site. And there's two of them, one on the Christian Ridge Road side, and there's also one over on the Crescent Lake Drive side.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Board members, any other questions for the applicant? Seeing none. Mr. Planner, do you have any comments that you'd like to make at this stage before I open it to the public?
I have no additional comments. I'm going to try to fix the video issue that we're having right now, though.
Okay.
So you can continue, I think, and open the public comment, but I have no outstanding comments beyond those presented in my review.
Okay, very good. Then I will, at this point, open the meeting to public comment, either in person, and seeing none, over the internet. We are currently having technical difficulties, and I cannot see people on the screen. So if somebody on the internet who is listening in or watching in wishes to comment, would you please identify yourself and make your comment accordingly?
Hi, good evening, Planning Board. This is Julie Brown from the Wentworth Watershed Association.
Thank you, Julie. Go ahead.
I am showing my video at this point from home, but I guess you cannot see me. Thank you for hearing me. I wanted to first say that the Wentworth Watershed Association is in support of the approval of the Planning Board's approval of this application. We have been working collaboratively with the hospital and having conversations about our concerns, and we are very pleased and relieved that the salt shed has been removed from the plans, as well as the commitment from the town to assist in helping them so they don't have to store salt on the premises in the watershed. Additionally, we're very happy to hear that you will be having your supervisor, I agree that that's a valid decision, attend the Green Snow Pro program in hopes of reduction of salt being added onto the pavement during that time, especially with the additional pavement that is being added. While we understand that it's a reduction in coverage and impermeable surfaces, it is still an addition of area that will be treated for salt by salt, because now it's going to be driven on versus a roof that was previously there. Again, we wanted to applaud the town planner and making sure that there's an O&M plan for being able to look at the overall drainage system for the hospital and make sure that there's a plan to remove sediments and catch all the catching of the runoff that takes place before it enters into that grassy swale. We had one additional concern that we are hoping that the planning board will endorse, and that is we are well aware of the fact that the hospital is not the only player in the watershed. However, though the hospital is the largest development with the most pavement in that area, and especially during the summer months when the Smith River is closed and we're in a drought like we have been, that the runoff from the hospital is actually can have about 18% of the direct load into Crescent Lake without the flow from Lake Wentworth entering in during the summer months. So it is a significant player. We applaud the hospital and making the right decisions, but we really having gone back and forth, are cognizant of the fact that we don't have the data of what's coming off of the commingled water from Crescent Lake and Main Street and from the hospital that comes over that grassy swale, and also whatever comes into the additional lot behind the hospital lot, that vacant lot, the wooded lot. And so we are asking the planning board to endorse having that water sampled before it enters the lake and is diluted, so that we can figure out what's coming in, no matter who it is. We're not litigious. We're not pointing fingers. What we would like is to find out what's actually happening. So when the road is being addressed, the Main Street project with DOT with a support of state funding is looked at in 2022, I believe, that we can actually take into account what loading is coming from where and from each party, and figure out solutions so that we can protect our town's waters. Because after all, that's part of the new master plan. It's understanding that our economy is based on the environmental resources, the water, and we want to make sure that we're doing our job to protect those waters as a community, because our community relies on it. So that being said, we are in support, but we were looking for the planning board to endorse. We'd be happy to help with the monitoring, not to point fingers, but literally to collect data so that we know what's happening, so we can make steps in the future as a community to figure out what the solutions are to any loading that's happening in any of our waters. So I thank you for listening, and I thank you, hospital, for making adjustments to your plans.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Any board member wish to ask Ms. Brown a question, follow up on anything that she had to say?
What would be the format of that testing? The Watershed Association would do it?
We have partnered with the town in water quality testing for a long period of time, and would be happy to do that again. And it would be a simple solution of having a couple of our volunteers grab samples at the outflow before, at the end of that, the pipe to nowhere, as it was previously called, on that vacant lot, to grab some affluent during storm events 2 to 4 times a year, and then that would be sent off to UNH Cooperative Extension to study the amount of solids, sediment, phosphorus, et cetera, entering into the area, so that we can actually just start to track what's actually coming from, again, that commingled water. We know it's not all Huggins, but we know that there's 3 major players, and we would like to be able to test the water.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Brown. I'm sorry, go on.
I guess we would need to have, knowing that we're not planning on being litigious, Huggins Hospital, that's not who we are. But what we would really like to do is have permission to enter onto that property sporadically, to be able to test that water and share the results with you, of course, and the town.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Brown. Jim?
I mean, I think Huggins, the issue with the monitoring, I don't know that they're necessarily opposed, but the issue is, what do you do with the data? What is the ramifications of it? I recognize data is valuable, but I don't know what it is. I'm not about to speak to the hospital of whether they would grant permission for anybody to come on, and I would let Dawn speak to that. But I think as far as monitoring, they don't want to be responsible for it, and they don't know what would happen with the data once it was obtained, and what does that mean. So for that reason, they're hoping that the board is not interested in going down the path of some sort of monitoring.
I can only speak for myself and not for the board in general, but it seems to me that this is a private venture between WWA and Huggins. If Huggins wants to get involved in it, I don't think this is within the planning board's purview to make a recommendation for a private venture between an organization, which is a nonprofit, and a hospital to monitor water offlow from the site. We don't have the authority to demand that. I don't think it's something that we can turn into condition for approval. So if Huggins is interested in getting together with Wentworth Association to do something like that, that is outside of our concern, and they're perfectly willing to go ahead and do that if they want to or not. I don't think that's something that we should concern ourselves with.
I would agree.
I would also suggest that it has to do with Huggins Wentworth Watershed Association and the town.
Sorry, Peter, could you repeat that? We kind of got a garbled transmission here.
It is associated with three people or three groups, as in the Huggins Hospital, the Wentworth Watershed Association, and also the town, because some of the water coming in there is from the town.
Agreed. Any other member of the public wish to speak to this application?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Massey?
Richard Massey. I just want to second the comments that Julie Brown made. It seems to me that this discussion has gone in directions that obviously the hospital and the town did not anticipate when they received a request to expand parking spaces. And as Julie pointed out, no one is opposed to that proposal, especially with the concessions that the hospital has made. However, it seems to me that these hearings brought to light some conditions on that property that were of some real concern. The evidence for that lies in front of anybody who has walked down into that area below the parking area. The evidence also lies in the recommendations of Ty and Bond for changes that ought to be made to protect Crescent Lake. It seems to me that the planning board is being urged basically to take that there's nothing to see here, that it should concern itself with crossing the T's and dotting the I's of this application and then turn away from this site. The problem is that we're not talking about a remote marsh somewhere at the edge of the watershed. We're talking about one of the principal water bodies in the center of town, whose waters flow directly through the heart of the town. And what happens in Crescent Lake happens all the way downstream into Back Bay and into Wolfeboro Bay. Those numbers that Julie read should get everyone's attention. The suggestion has been made that the acreage here represents only 2% of the total acreage in the watershed. But of course, not all acreage is equal in terms of what it deposits into our lakes and streams. 80% of the watershed is forested land, some of it lying miles away from the lake. I don't think we can compare what that exports in terms of phosphorus and silt to the 17 acres of hospital property and to Christian Ridge Road, which lie right next to the lake. A lot has been made about how well everything is working down there below the parking area. But in fact, none of us can know that. Why don't we know it? Because we haven't tested. We don't know what's flowing from that property into the lake. We have anecdotal evidence. We had conductivity readings that were quite high when they were taken a few years ago adjacent to that property, suggesting that there is material reaching the lake from that property. But there's been a concerted effort to discourage the town or anyone else from thinking about taking samples. In the end, I think that the planning board can't in good conscience turn away from this property, and understandably, you cannot tie the hospital's hands to the proposal before you. However, I think the board could at least take a position urging the town and urging the hospital to work cooperatively with the Wentworth Watershed Association or anyone they choose to take samples of what's coming off that property so that we know once and for all if it really everything is working as it should, or whether maybe something needs attention. I'll just remind the board of something that I think the Watershed Association pointed out. There's a major road project coming down in a few years along South Main Street. In order to know how to deal with issues like runoff coming off those roads, you're going to need data. And I know Mr. Rhines and Mr. Pusher are concerned about what would be done with the data. Actually, nothing at the moment. It's just data collection. We collect data throughout the watershed all the time. We don't go knocking on doors. We don't go accusing people of doing damaging things. It's just part of the bigger picture. And I think the planning board owes it to the town, not simply to follow the letter of the laws, of the regulation that enforces. I think the planning board owes it to the town to follow the spirit of those regulations. And it would be in the spirit of the stormwater regulations and of the town's master plan to turn a blind eye to the issues that have come to light in these hearings.
Thank you, Mr. Massey.
Thank you.
Any other members of the public wish to speak to this application? Hearing none, I'm going to close the public hearing.
Mr. Chairman, may I just make one comment?
Sure, I'll reopen it.
Thank you. I just want to, for the benefit of everyone listening and for the Lake Wentworth Association, the fact that there is residential development heavily around Crescent Lake. The New Hampshire Stormwater and Anti-Degradation publication, Volume 1, put out in 2008 by the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, it identifies what the typical pollutant load is for certain things. So the total suspended solids for a general residential development is 100 milligrams per liter. For a commercial parking lot, it's 27. So it's 4 times worse for the watershed with total suspended solids from residential development. If that's general residential development. If it was medium density residential development, it's 85 milligrams per liter versus 27 for a parking lot. The total phosphorus is, for medium density residential, is 52 milligrams per liter, but a commercial parking lot is 0.15 milligrams per liter. So it's more than 4 times for the residential development that's around Crescent Lake. And the total nitrogen in a typical medium density residential is 5.15 milligrams per liter in total nitrogen versus a commercial parking lot, which is 1.9. So to, again, zone in on Huggins as one of the larger developments around Crescent Lake, the fact that the residential development, which is generally 4 times worse than the parking lot, is, again, I feel, I just think that that's good information that both the board and the public should be aware of.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ryan.
Thank you.
I'm going to close the public hearing at this point. Members of the board, what is your pleasure? Okay, I will then begin. I reviewed the minutes of the May 5th meeting, and there were 3 issues that I found that came out of our discussion that were impediments to the proceeding of the application towards a final decision. There was the salt shed. There was the presentation of the tie-and bond conceptual stormwater best management practices for the Huggins site. And then there was the question of snow storage. The salt shed has been removed from the application, so that's no longer a concern for this board to consider. The tie-and bond conceptual stormwater best management suggestions, which were presented to us, I submit, in my opinion at any rate, have been thoroughly answered by our own Dave Ford, Department of Public Works Manager, and a professional engineer who has written to us saying that the stormwater management practices in place currently for the hospital as it exists now are functioning as designed. They may not look pretty, but they function as designed. And as far as snow storage, we have heard from the applicant tonight, and we have as a condition, should we decide to approve, that a site-wide snow storage plan will be in place for the hospital. So I find at this stage no impediments towards moving forward on this proposal. We have a really thorough, in my opinion, application here. The current application's stormwater management plan is been looked over by the planner. We have a professional engineer who signed off on it, Mr. Rhines, and we have a really good stormwater narrative dated March 17. So I personally have no concerns about handling stormwater management on this particular part of this particular project, this particular part of the application. So I would be happy to move. Should the board want a motion to approve? If the board wants to have further discussion, we can continue with further discussion.
It's my recollection that some of the stormwater that was of most significant concern was actually the town system. So hopefully in the year 2022, when they redo the road and fix the drainage, that would be addressed. It seems like that unfinished pipe actually belongs to all of us.
That's how it seems from the report that we got from Mr. Ford. That is, when somebody went to lunch and forgot to finish the job. And that's always been the problem with stormwater management on that site. There's an unknown quantity coming from the Huggins site. There's an unknown quantity coming from the town. It's mingled at the bottom, and we don't have any way of separating the two. But at least according to Mr. Ford, who is a professional engineer, the system in place now is currently functioning the way it was designed to. And that's really all that we need to be concerned about when we're looking at this application. Are the stormwater regulations adequately addressed by the applicant? And they appear to be.
I would just like to suggest, and am I coming through? I hope I am, that the town should be worried about what goes on in our water bodies, as in Winter Harbor, there are issues with cyanobacteria, and the town is working on that and testing. And I would suggest that Crescent Lake is a reasonably contained water body, although there is water flow going through from Lake Wentworth down over the dam. But more testing by the town and by organizations is definitely a plus.
I don't think you'd get any argument from any member of the board on that at all, Peter. Perhaps that's something that the Conservation Commission could look at, but I don't think that's really something that the board could concern itself with. And in the particular application that we're dealing with tonight.
I am not saying that it is a board issue. I am saying that it is something that we should encourage. And as a board, we can encourage that outside of this application.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, I'd agree with what Peter just said, and perhaps it should be, at a certain grid point all around the perimeter of the lake, because as Jim said, a lot of the problems come from septic systems, laundries, and things that dump in. I personally have had experience of a broken cesspool right next to this lake, not my own, but a client's, that, was direct dumping some not very nice stuff into the lake. So I think sampling all around the perimeter methodically would make more sense. Maybe we could get a study or something going.
Any other members of the board? All right, then I'm going to call the motion at this point, and I would like to move that this board approve. Bear with me 1 second while I find the page. Case number 2020-14, Huggins Hospital, tax map 231-090E, site plan review with the 12 conditions.
Would you like me to read those for the record?
You better read them for the record, but I'll just say for the 12 conditions as enumerated by the planner and to be read as follows.
Okay, 12 conditions to be incorporated as follows. One being the incorporation of the 8 plans presented, ranging from the plan of land all the way to the proposed conditions drainage plan. Condition 2 is that the applicant shall be responsible for the payment of all recording fees to the Registry of Deeds. Condition 3 is the incorporation of all the documentation submitted within the application package, obviously with the exception of any materials related to the salt shed, which I'll get to in a second. Condition 4 is all final plans shall be stamped by a licensed land surveyor, wetland scientist, and any other appropriate certified professional. A letter of ADA compliance shall be submitted by the applicant, stamped by a professional engineer. The applicant shall be responsible for the payment of financial security. Obviously, the applicant did provide an estimate of financial security on this case, and that shall be reviewed by the town's consulting engineer at the cost of the applicant. No construction or site work for the site plan shall be undertaken prior to the financial security being in place. Installation of erosion control measures and inspection by the town's consulting engineer shall take place prior to any construction activity. 8, the applicant shall enter into a construction observation agreement with the town's consulting engineer for site work, the cost of which shall be borne by the applicant. Condition 9, the approval does not include work related to the salt shed, and the applicant shall submit a full revised application with all references to the salt shed component being removed from those materials. Condition 10 will be slightly modified from what was presented in my review. It shall read, Huggins Hospital shall provide a certification document that the snow removal supervisor has completed Green Snow Pro certification through the state of New Hampshire. Condition 11, Huggins Hospital shall provide a site comprehensive stormwater systems operations and maintenance plan for all structures and systems on the Huggins Hospital property prior to the commencement of construction. Condition 12, Huggins Hospital shall provide a standalone snow storage plan to be incorporated as plan number 9 as part of this approval, and to include a note on that plan that all Huggins Hospital, that the Huggins Hospital snow removal supervisor shall be Green Snow Pro certified. Those are conditions 1 through 12 as amended.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Planner. We'll hear a second to that motion.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Thurston. All in favor? Sorry, but before I call for the final vote, Mr. Rhines?
The only thing is page number, page
So Jim, it still will be plan number 9 because I already removed the plans related to the salt shed from the application package.
Okay, continuing on then. Seconded by Mr. Thurston. All in favor?
Mr. Hodder, could you do a roll call vote for the sake
roll
of...
call vote, yep.
Thank you.
Julie Jacob?
Yes?
Brad Harriman?
Yes.
John Thurston?
Aye.
Mike Hodder, aye. Vaughn Dugan?
Yes?
Peter Goodwin?
Yes.
We have a unanimous vote.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank Thank you, board members.
Thank you to the board members.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Kathy. Jack.
Okay, let's see. The next item on the agenda, action items, but we don't have any action items, correct, Matt?
That is correct. You'll have a few at your mid-July meeting, but not tonight.
Okay, all right, and next item, public comments. If any member of the public who is listening in wants to comment to us, now would be the time to do that. And there's no member of the public in the Great Halls. Okay, I don't hear anyone wanting to speak to us, so we'll go on to the next item. Other business, discussion of the CIP document, project voting process. Who wants to, Mike, did you?
All right, I'll take that if I may. I'll be brief. For members of the board who have not been on the CIP or do not know how it works, during CIP hearings, departments make presentations of proposals that they want to get the town to work on. The board hears the proposals, makes comments, and then moves on to the next departmental proposal, and then the next until we've heard all of them. And when they're all done, Matt and the board draft a capital improvements program plan for all presentations given to the board. We then vote on that entire document, yes or no. During the presentations made to the board, CIP committee members oftentimes have concerns about some of the presentations, concerns that might reach to the point of not wanting to recommend a particular project to the entire CIP committee. But there is no mechanism currently in the CIP process to allow that. For example, if Department X makes a presentation and I find that they have not substantiated through their presentation that there's a need for the project, or that there's a particular urgency for the project, or that it has, in particular, anything to do with the master plan, I have no way of indicating that I find that particular project to be lacking. The only thing I can do at the very end of the process is to vote no for the entire program. I have no other means to express my concerns. I can say something in the minutes, but the minutes never accompany the document as presented to the Board of Selectmen or to the Budget Committee. And if members of the Budget Committee or the Selectmen want to find out how individual board members voted or discussed a particular project, they'd have to go through the minutes piece by piece themselves to discover that. What I'm proposing is allowing CIP committee members the opportunity to register in the document itself their concerns on each project. And the vote would be either to recommend or not to recommend a particular project. And the reasons for that vote would have to be very strictly outlined. Not, you can't vote, I don't like it because I don't like the kind of building, or because it's in my neighborhood and I don't want it in my neighborhood. It has to be, the vote up or vote down has to be according to the statutory requirement in the CIP setup in the RSAs. The RSA gives the CIP committee authority only to determine the need for a project, its urgency, and how it relates to the master plan. That's all the authority that the CIP committee has. And then to make a presentation to its customers, the Board of Selectmen, or the Budget Committee. So any vote on a particular project has to satisfy those three requirements: its urgency, its need, and its relation to the master plan. If it's the wrong color, you don't get to have any opinion whatsoever. But if the project has nothing to do with the master plan suggestions, or is in direct contravention to the master plan suggestion, or if a project is presented as being urgent, yet it is a cosmetic project, not an urgent project, those would be reasons to register a not recommended. The reason why I'm presenting this idea tonight as something to think about is just for the board to think about it. CIP committee is a subcommittee of the planning board. If this is new, this has never been done on the CIP committee before. If it is to be adopted, the planning board should say this is to be adopted. But since it's new, I thought simply tonight to introduce the idea and then throw it open for discussion and then revisit it again prior to the first CIP meeting and either institute the process or not. So I'll leave the question up to the planning board to decide. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Okay, all right. Well, I've been on CIP for quite a number of years, and it has always seemed to me that we kind of act on consensus, where we discuss items, discuss projects thoroughly. We ask for more information from department heads, and many times department heads will modify the projects based on comments made by members of the committee. And it seems to be a very productive process to me. We're advisory. We're really there to determine if the project is consistent with the master plan and to lay out for the voters of the community what's going to be happening in the next 10 years as it relates to capital projects. And I've talked with Mike about this, I'm uncomfortable with it. I really feel as if the process has worked. Last year, we had one project that we were all uncomfortable with, and that was, it's in the minutes, that was the Livy Museum. We felt that project had been kind of thrust on CIP. But prior to that, we've changed timetables for department heads. We've said, no, that one is not ready to go ahead. And the whole CIP has been adjusted to accommodate our comments. I don't know. I really feel as if we have come together as a committee. I don't feel as if anyone has been left out in the cold because their comments hadn't been heard, except for last year, that project. And so I'm sort of a little concerned about changing and putting what I think is a major change to the process in place. I'm concerned about the impact this may have on the department heads, because I think we've developed a reasonably good system with the department heads where they come to us and they expect to have hard conversations about projects, but generally things are modified so that people are comfortable with whatever the decision. So I mean, as Mike says, people need to think about it, and we can talk about it at the next meeting again, but that's kind of where I am right now. Anybody want to?
Kathy,
Yeah.
Kathy, my question would be, is it useful to have the dissenting opinions also heard?
I didn't quite.
His question was, is it useful to have the dissenting opinions heard?
I think the dissenting opinions are heard in the discussions within CIP. And of the years that I've been on CIP, I haven't known of a member who said, well, except for last year, I really don't want to vote for this this process because of Project X. So I guess that's where my reluctance is that I think we have to be very, very careful that a project, and again, it was the Libby Museum, that seemed to have been brought ahead of many other projects and that were already in the CIP, that were kind of in line to be dealt with. And it created a lot of discomfort on the members of the committee. So I would hope that the dissenters would have their voices heard, Peter. Now, maybe, I'm kind of idealistic.
Well, I guess my issue would be that if there are dissenters, should the public hear rather than just have it an internal issue?
Well, I think that's what Mike's issue is.
My issue
I
is...
don't want to speak for him, but I think that's...
No, thank you, Madam Chairman. Chairwoman, you can speak for me when needed. The problem is, Peter, that with a project like, and this came up in relation to the Libby Museum, but in my opinion, there's at least one other project that I can talk to, which I will not mention tonight, which engendered a certain degree of concern among CIP members. But there is, short of saying something which lives in the minutes, there is no other way of indicating for a CIP member his or her concern for a particular project. The only time the CIP committee votes is at the end of the process when the whole document is voted yes or no. And the votes have always been unanimous, and they have always been yes. Because we all want, the majority of the CIP, every CIP program has been a really good program, well thought out, well presented. The department heads do a remarkably good job on making their presentations, and we're all proud to present the plan to the selectmen and to the budget committee. It really does enshrine what we hope to see for the town in the coming year and in a 10-year span. But there are occasionally projects that raise concerns, and CIP committee members have no way of letting anyone know those concerns other than through the minutes, other than, of course, during the discussions in the committee itself, but other than through the minutes. And as you know, minutes are difficult at times to use, and in particular, very few people wade through other boards' minutes when they're considering a project. Julie.
I'm just wondering why each particular CIP or the department heads for each project, why each project isn't voted on individually. Like the budget committee does their stuff, and each thing they do individually, and then they do the whole thing.
Well, they're certainly discussed individually.
But they're not voted on individually?
No, because it's a plan that is brought to us from the town manager for us to...
The project is presented. The CIP committee hears the presentation from the department head, asks questions, discusses, and then assigns, works on the cost of the project, and then assigns a time during a year in which that project should be effected. And the more urgent, the more needful a project, the closer to today it gets assigned. So a project that has to fix a building which is currently collapsing will be in next year's CIP, this matter of public safety. A project that would be really nice to have, but isn't necessarily important right now, will get assigned out maybe 10 years from now, the end of the CIP span of attention. That's how projects are ranked on the CIP. Urgency need by assigning them to a particular time. Other towns actually have a ranking system of 1 through 5. 5 not recommended. 1 through 4 ranking the various degrees of urgency. We don't do anything like that on our CIP. We don't have a way of indicating members' concerns on particular projects. And all I'm suggesting is that, and however whatever the structure we might come up with, I'm suggesting that some way of allowing individual CIP members to express their concerns within a very strict, constrained series of requirements, nothing outside statute. So you're not stepping outside statutory authority, always within statute. Should be allowed.
Right, and what we had taught when Mike and I discussed this, we had talked about if we were to do something like this, we would really make the comments/vote on just the projects coming forward in the next, going to town meeting.
Yeah.
For the next year, not the projects in the future.
No, it would just be for the current year or the projected year's projects, not for the ones that are, like, for example, on the current CIP that we did last year, the senior center is out 10 years. There are other more pressing issues the board felt that needed to take priority. So that there would not be a vote allowed on whether or not there should be a senior center. But projects that are coming up in this current year, their vote would be allowed on those, so the board members could express their concerns.
And basically what we do, we're just CIP is not just a committee, but we are a committee of the planning board. So the project then is voted on by the planning board, and then when we go to the selectmen and the budget committee, most times in my presentation, I'll say the report indicates that we would like to, and I think I did last time, the senior center was added because it was an item that was in the master plan. That other projects, like the CIP was very upset for several years, and you remember this, Brad, because of the community center and the the municipal electric building. They were just sitting there in disrepair, and we wanted to, they weren't on CIP, and so we said to the selectmen, we really need to deal with these issues. And so finally, the town manager, I think the following year, did bring them forward. So, I mean, maybe, I don't know, and it's up to how you folks feel, but I mean, we can report out things. I guess it's the vote that worries me, Mike, to actually have somebody say, no. Now, you have mentioned 3 things that they'd have to base their vote on.
That can be softened. I mean, we don't actually have to have, like on a town warrant, budget committee 5 yes, 2 no. It doesn't have to be in that kind of a format. It could be in some softer format. 5 members thought this was a good idea, 2 didn't really like it that much, or something to that effect, so it feels more advisory than actual vote, because we don't have any authority. We have only recommendational authority, so to speak. If we cast it in some fashion that would not make it seem as if this was a an authoritative vote, but an expression of individual concerns. 2 members had concerns about the timing. 2 members were not convinced that the proposal was covered by recommendations in the master plan, something to that effect. But currently, I mean, on the current CIP program, there is an entry for the Libby Museum. I don't mean to beat that horse, but it happens to be the one that brought this up in my mind, because it was a contentious issue last year. That is on the CIP program. It was recommended by the CIP committee, was approved by the planning board, was sent off to the Board of Selectmen and to the Budget Committee. Nowhere, other than in the minutes, was there any indication in that plan that numbers of people on the CIP committee had serious concerns about that proposal. What the customers of that plan received, and that's the Selectmen and the Budget Committee, what the customers of that plan received was a plan with a unanimous recommendation, go for it, guys. Yet the concerns that could be seen in the minutes were nowhere to be seen in the plan or the narrative attached to the plan. And my worry is that there's no mechanism currently to allow for that sort of concern to be expressed and discovered. And that's what I'm trying to remedy. I'm not trying to do anything, accumulate power to the CIP or do anything like that. I'm simply trying to create a mechanism for the CIP's concerns to be expressed where one doesn't exist currently. However that may take, and I put vote, but that's just because that's how I think. It doesn't mean that's the way it has to be or could be. There are lots of other ways to do it too.
So, any other questions? Otherwise, if you all would kind of think about this, and if we could discuss it at our next meeting, because we're then going to be starting CIP at the end of July. So, you know, we'd like to put this in, if there's going to be a change, we'd want to put it in place. So is that okay with everyone? Okay.
And I'll work with Kathy and with Matt to come up with some variant to the vote idea, and we'll present that next time. And if the board feels it's a good idea or not, we'll have a vote on that so that we can then present it to the subcommittee.
Okay, all right, thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see, update on July 21st agenda.
Just a brief update for items on the July 21st meeting agenda, which is 2 weeks from this evening. We will discuss this CIP voting matter again. And just as a note, the CIP materials have gone out to the department heads for their review and preparation of materials. And a tentative schedule has been developed and presented for the CIP meetings as well to the department heads. Additionally, on the July 21st meeting agenda, we will have a discussion of a few zoning changes for the 2021 vote, including some changes to the Affordable Housing Overlay District that Council has advised us on. I will bring you a proposal on the impact fees as well and how to deal with that issue, something slightly different than what we had discussed before. And a few smaller potential amendments that I've identified over the past couple months working with the ordinance within the non-conforming structures section, and then potentially a few small other ones as well. On top of that, I would like to bring the parking ordinance back to the board just to take a look at that one more time, so that's all top of mind for everyone as we move forward into full zoning season. And then lastly, Paul Zimmerman has requested some time on the agenda to talk to you about the letter that he received regarding drive-thrus. So he will also be an agenda item on that July 21st meeting agenda, as long as the board is comfortable with that approach. And this will be more obviously a work session style meeting with no public hearings.
Okay, so maybe we could put Mr. Zimmerman on first.
I was going to put him right up front so he could get in and out as quickly as possible.
Okay, he basically feels that we have not been specific enough.
Correct.
So if
He's just looking for some better guidance from the board about why the issue is not appropriate for the community. So, yeah,
Right.
he just requested to visit the board about that issue.
Oh, okay, now,
I have a question.
yeah,
Can you give me some more information about the non-conforming?
Yeah, so one of the issues we ran into on a recent case, John, was I had someone question whether the non-conforming structures language could be done through the special exception process because it's not technically a use. So I'm talking to council about that right now. Just for informational purposes, I know most of you know this, but we always had this provision in the ordinance that said that non-conforming structures could be expanded by 25%, through the zoning board. But the argument that I ran into with actually another zoning administrator was that that was not technically allowed to go through the special exception process because the existing non-conformity of the structure is not a use, and that's what the special exception process is supposed to be a remedy to. So I'm talking to council right now about whether we've been using the right mechanism historically, but I need to figure out if we're not doing it right, how should it be done, and what do we do with all of these exceptions that we've already granted? So that's an active conversation we're having. It might not be an issue at all, but it is something that was raised to me, and I feel like I've got to follow up on it now that the concern is kind of in front of me. Does that answer your question? It's kind of an odd one, and I may come back on the 21st and say this is a non-issue, but when you look at the guidance on special exceptions in New Hampshire law, it all talks about use. It doesn't talk about dimensional changes. So I've got to look into that and see whether that's actually an issue or not.
Has this setup worked all right for folks? I mean, are people comfortable and, it seems
No worse than the other.
What was that?
It's no worse.
Okay. That's,
I think it's far preferable to sitting at home in front of a screen. It's a lot easier to interact with people when they're
Yes.
right in front of your face.
right.
Even if we are wearing these stupid things, and I am having some trouble hearing people through their masks.
Yes,
That just might be because I'm old, but
yeah.
it is a bit of an encumbrance, but there was no problem, as long as the screen remains active and I can see the people at home who are looking to talk, there's no problem whatsoever. It's when the screen went dead that
Yeah, and this is not the computer that I wanted to use, so I'm sorry about that. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again.
But other than that, I thought it worked well.
Oh, okay, well then, let's sort of keep doing this then.
So it worked for everybody? I don't want to look at Tim because I know he doesn't like doing this, but
Yeah. This is a little difficult.
yeah, and I didn't want to do the monitors, but I couldn't think of another way that you could actually see the people at home. So hopefully that works okay. So Tim put a lot of effort into this, so I want to thank him for doing that. So he did a great job.
Thank you, Tim.
Okay, let's see, the next item is the May 16th minutes. Any issues?
Is it May or June?
June 16th.
June 16th.
It says May 16th, that's what
Oh, I'm sorry. It should say June 16th. That's my error. I'm really on fire tonight.
sorry.
Yeah, it's June.
I had one.
June 16th, sorry about that. Okay,
I have
about the June 16th minutes, folks.
One correction, page 4. Paragraph Mike Potter stated, after the word that, insert he disagreed with, and then it should be Laura Spector Morgan.
Okay. Anything else? You want to make a motion to approve these minutes as corrected?
So moved.
Motion has been made, and I'll second the motion, and I'll do a roll call vote. Von Dugan,
Yes.
Mike Hodder,
Yes.
John Thurston,
Abstain.
Brad Harriman,
Yes.
and Julie Jacobs,
Yes.
And Kathy Barnard, I vote yes, and the minutes are approved.
We got Peter, too.
Peter Goodwin, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry
We
about
just said
that.
how wonderful it works, too.
Are you okay with the minutes?
I'm fine, yes, I vote yes.
Okay, I'm very sorry, Peter. I thought I was on a real roll here. Okay, any other issues?
Just a note, this was Mary Jane's first set of minutes. I did not help her at all. Neither did Leanne, so she did a great job. If you haven't had a chance to meet Mary Jane, she was sitting right over there this evening, so if you want to say hi, she is the new recording assistant for the board. So she's not there right now, but she's the new recording assistant.
Good job, Mary Jane.
Okay, so somebody want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion has been made. I'll second the motion. Okay, our roll call vote to adjourn the meeting. Peter Goodwin.
Yes,
Okay, Vaughn.
thank you.
Yes.
Mike Hodder.
Yes.
John Thurston.
Yes.
Brad Harriman.
Yes.
Julie Jacobs.
Yes.
And Kathy Barnard. I vote to adjourn the meeting. And thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Until next time.